Hello students, my name is Anita Raj and I'm one of the co-founders of eCoreAcademy along with my younger brother AJ Raj. Today we have a new addition to our Meet the Champs section. I will be interviewing Dr. Samantha Scott, an innovative young leader of color with the startup company Junebrain, developing a product to aid patients with retinitis pigmentosa. Dr. Scott so kindly took time to sit with me for this interview. Dr. Scott's life and career have been impacted by her perseverance in finding different but unique paths to reach her goals. She is both a scientist and a patient with a rare neuromuscular disease which has forced her to achieve her goals in different ways than her peers. However, Dr. Scott states that she learned to think outside of the box, and this was wonderful because it gave her more freedom to be creative and innovative. This is the amazing message she'd like to share with all of us. Without further ado, let's get into some background information on Dr. Scott. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the post notification bell, comment, and share. Here's some information on Dr. Scott. She's a biomedical scientist and engineer with 12 years of experience in biomedical device development, neuroimaging, and the study of human brain and retina function. Dr. Scott did biomedical engineering and a doctorate in philosophy from the University of Southern California, did computational neuroscience and artificial intelligence at the University of Oxford, along with a Stanford University Overseas Study Program, and a BS in biochemical engineering at Stanford University. Dr. Scott has work experience as a business consultant at the Persona Ultrasound and Children's Hospital Los Angeles at the Sabin Research Institute, a graduate research scientist at the University of Southern California, a research scientist in Vasoptic Medical, an editor and project manager at Innovative Strategic Communications, and a postdoctoral fellow and collaborator at the National Institutes of Health. Now she is the founder and CEO of Junebrain, a startup company developing a product which will help with partial vision restoration for patients with retinitis pigmentosa, a retinal disease causing progressive vision loss. Resulting brain images identify a biomarker and can help Dr. Scott and her team predict how much visual function the patient will gain following sight restoration with the implant. Dr. Scott has numerous health-related publications under her belt, which we will discuss, and she is part of the NIH Women of Color Research Network and Stand for Entrepreneurs in Washington, D.C. Overall, Dr. Scott is an inspirational and personable role model, and I can't wait to introduce you to her. So, welcome to eCoreAcademy, Dr. Scott. I'm very excited to be speaking with such an inspirational person today. I wanted to dive right into the questions, and I actually wanted to jump a little bit back in time to your childhood. So my first question was, can you give us an overview of your background, such as your childhood and how it contributed to who you are today?
Sure. So let's see, I was born in Oklahoma, but I only lived there for 2 years. My dad was, he's a fighter pilot in the Air Force. He's now retired. So I was born on the Air Force Base in Altus, Oklahoma. And after that, we winded up moving to New Mexico. So I actually spent most of my childhood in Albuquerque. And I went to a few different schools. Mm-hmm. And eventually, my dad was in a lot of different places, so I would go visit him wherever he was stationed. A lot of moving around, but it was nice. And then we winded up moving to Tennessee. My mom remarried, so I went to high school in Tennessee, and after that, just on to college in California. But yeah, I would say my childhood was pretty awesome. In the way that the things that I liked the most, my mom was very adventurous. So she would take me on hiking trips, camping trips. She was a photographer, so I would tag along with her to different events. So I loved all of that.
That's really cool. Hearing about how you moved to different locations and had a different experience. And I think that's really, really fascinating. Another question I wanted to ask related to your background, I know we talked about this a bit, but it's a major part of who you are, and that is Myasthenia Gravis, MG, which is a neuromuscular disease that we discussed. Could you talk a little bit about your experience with this?
Yeah, sure. So, I was a healthy person for a good number of years. So, I did like karate in high school, and I was in track in middle school and whatnot. But I'd say in grad school is when I started to get really sick. And by sick for me, it meant this level of weakness and fatigue that was just, I was literally a couch potato. So it affected my ability to get around, my mobility, my voice. Breathing was very hard for me. My vision, it impacted my vision. So yeah, that happened in grad school. So I'd say the last couple years, maybe 2 or 3 years of grad school, I was both trying to get through my PhD and dealing with an undiagnosed disease. And I was finally diagnosed in 2017, so about 5 years after I started getting really sick. And it was the reason why I started Junebrain, was because of many of the experiences I had as a patient.
So would you say that it like helped, while it may have been a difficult experience, it definitely helped you become who you are today and become a stronger person? Yeah.
Yes, it has had a profound impact on just how I live life.
Yeah.
I'd say that the main thing, with what I have, you can't go all the time. So many of the things that I was used to doing, I was always into something, some activity, going somewhere, traveling somewhere. I couldn't do that anymore. So I think it forced me to slow down in a way that was actually very healthy. And force myself to have a better work-life balance.
So in a way, it made you take care of yourself a little bit more, because I can obviously tell that you're an extremely busy person. So you also mentioned grad school. So I wanted to talk a little bit about your educational experience. So I know you have earned degrees from the University of Southern California and Stanford University while spending some time abroad at Oxford. These are all very prestigious colleges, and I know myself and my peers are looking towards the college admissions process, and we have eyes on whatever universities we can get into to the best of our ability. So I wanted to ask, could you tell us a little bit about your time there at those?
Sure. So Stanford, I loved it. I love Stanford. It will always be my happy place. I would say the thing I love the most is kind of twofold. So, in high school, I was at the top of my class. Nothing was ever easy for me. I had to study my butt off in high school, but getting to college, which is totally different. I met so many different types of people. The events they had, you'd have like the Korean Student Society would have an event one day, and the Nigerian Society another day, and I would go to everything, mostly for the free food, but just because you learn so much. But I'd say what I loved the most about college was being able to get into research. That was the first time when I really had hands-on work in a lab environment. And I'd always kind of dreamed of doing that, but I didn't know exactly what that would look like. So that was a first opportunity. The hard thing about college was that it was hard. Stanford was hard. But it was hard for everyone. So there was a lot of camaraderie that you build, doing study groups with other people. But they call people at Stanford, it's called duck syndrome. You look like you're kind of sailing along peacefully on the surface, but you're paddling like crazy underneath. So I think it was me also learning very slowly. It took me a while, learning how to balance school with all of the other stuff that was there to do, like archery or student groups. But yeah, USC also, that was my PhD work. I'll say I love learning, so I loved all of them. So yeah, USC was just really when I had the chance to push forward my own project and be super creative. And my lab director was pretty awesome. He gave people free reign on their projects, and he helped as much as he helped a lot, but he still let you kind of manage everything. And then Oxford, of course, was wonderful. I was just there for 1 quarter, but I did what was it? A tutorial is what they call it in artificial intelligence.
Oh, wow.
So that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was really fascinating to hear about like the autonomy you kind of had in college with research and doing things that you interested you, like attending those cultural events, etc. But then you mentioned the duck syndrome, and that actually really that actually got me thinking quite a bit, and actually transitions into the next question I wanted to ask you, as in how did you deal with the stress of going to such prestigious universities and, like you said, being a top student, etc.
Yeah, that was hard because I put a lot of pressure on myself. And there were different reasons for that. You know, one, I always felt that I was starting a little bit behind the curve. I had to prove myself more than the next person.
Mm-hmm.
So it was difficult. And I found that mental health was an issue with students. And that was because there was so much pressure to do well, and especially if you wanted to go on to some grad school next, and you really had to, try to keep up a certain GPA. But I think what I realized after a while is I could only do my best. I could only do so much. You're just one human being. And by the time I graduated from Stanford, in high school, I had a 4.0. I did not have that leaving Stanford. I think it was a B average, which is still good. It was much better than I expected for myself, given how hard everything was. But all of the research experience I had helped with my application. So I realized, kind of marching through Stanford, that you do your best. And it's nice that people tend to look at the whole package these days. So it's not just your scores, it's not just your GPA, it's also what experiences you had. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, that perfectly answered my question, because I think the biggest takeaway is I know a lot of people define themselves via their grades and their academic performance, but I think it's definitely, you've proved, Dr. Scott, that there's just so much more to a person, and there's so much more to just like that kind of superficial thing. Yeah. But so next, I do want to transition into some of your work experience. So I wanted to ask, could you talk about some of the other jobs you had, such as being a business consultant, a research scientist, etc.?
Sure. And just start real quick, going back to your last question, I will say something that was very helpful was having a group of people who are open about going through the same challenges. I think that's really important whenever you can find that in college, grad school, wherever. Just have ranting sessions. So my jobs, those were all me trying to learn what type of research I wanted to do, other things that were not research. There's just so many career trajectories for each major. I wanted to know what all of them were. So PedSono, they were a startup spinning out of USC. So while I was getting my PhD, I also earned a certificate in technology commercialization from the business school. And that was because I knew I always wanted to do a startup at some point. So I wanted to add some kind of knowledge that's needed to actually take research from a lab type setting and put it in people's hands. So part of that work, my professor just asked me to help out with some researchers on campus who are also looking at spinning out startups. So I just helped with their business models and commercialization plans. And see, after grad school, I went to NIH. So I did a postdoc there at NIAAA. That was awesome. It lasted about a year. And I think at that point, I realized I really wanted to go more into the startup world than academia. And I saw the startup world as a way to have even more, not just freedom. You have a lot of creative freedom in academia, but it's just more focused on translating technology into people's hands. So after that, I went to a startup in Baltimore, VaseOptic. That was my first real startup experience, which was awesome. They had like the games in the office, all that kind of stuff, couches and whatnot. So that was a lot of fun. It's also when I got sick really bad, right before I was diagnosed. So I had to stop working. And I winded up becoming a medical writer from home, which was another career path that I had never really considered. But I still do that on the side, even today, because I like it so much. And somewhere in there is when I started my own company.
Yeah. When you mentioned how like Petsona and all these companies were startups, I just realized like these must have contributed to you eventually having your own startup. Yeah, that's really cool. So you mentioned that you were a medical writer, especially after you got sicker, and even today. So I was looking through your profile, obviously, and I saw some publications, and I usually get really interested when I do see like articles like that because I do want to write something like that one day. But seeing your publications on these topics, especially like health related topics, I was wondering, can you give us some background on how you came to write these pieces, what the research process was like, etc.?
Yeah, sure. So my first paper, and I think all the publications you saw were part of my own research. None of it was my medical writing job. But the first paper came from, I think the year after my sophomore year in college. I did this really cool neuroengineering summer program at UCLA, and they gave you a project, and you were able to write a paper. And I published it in the Stanford undergrad journal. So that was kind of my first feed in. And that whole process was awesome. So I'd say in general, for all of those projects, the papers, it started out with lots of background research. So understanding, for example, with the retinal prosthesis, I wrote a paper about blind patients before and after they receive sight restoration treatment. So understanding the disease, lots of background research, and then you come up with questions that are still unanswered in the field. And from there, my lab advisor helped me to develop a whole clinical study plan. So a way that we could take patients with that disease, put them in an MRI machine, get data, analyze the data, and understand changes in their brain before and after they get the treatment. And then you just publish that data. For me, and in a lot of cases, you have to submit your work to a lot of journals before it's accepted. Not all the time. Sometimes you get it right away, but it is a process. You submit to one journal, they come back with feedback saying, no, not for us, or yeah, maybe if you make these changes, we'll think about it. And you resubmit, try again until you get into a journal.
Yeah. So going off of that, how you said you have to try again with your articles, like what was that process like being rejected maybe from one journal, having to edit for another journal? I'm guessing it's probably very hectic, and I feel like you would have to have a lot of determination and passion for whatever you are studying in that article or that paper that you're publishing. So what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, well, no, that's a great question. So usually when you have a paper you want to publish, you come up with a list of target journals, and maybe like your top choice is at the top, and then you follow with journals that have, they call them impact factors, a lower impact factor. So with me, my PhD advisor always laughs at me because when I was rejected from the first journal and made the edits, I'd say, oh, well, this is even better. Let's submit it to an even harder journal to get into, and then be rejected from that one and then go further down the list. But it was very hard. And I think rejection in general, especially in the startup world, you get it all the time, whether it's from papers you're trying to publish or investors you're talking to. And a mentor of mine actually sent me an article recently that was pretty spot on. And what I've learned is that all that rejection, I would take it, very personally for a long time. And it kind of weighs on you, even if you love what you're doing. But what I learned is that when people give you feedback, it's not so much about you, it's more them sharing what their values are, or how they view the world, or what they think should be in a journal. And it's not necessarily a negative about yourself. So that was, I think, the biggest takeaway I've gotten from so many rejections, and there have been a lot. Some yeses, and those are the most important ones, but also no's.
I think that's a really important lesson. Yeah, not to take criticism personally. I know a lot of the criticism we get is supposed to be constructive, but we do take it personally.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And it's not always constructive either.
Yeah, of course. But since we're talking a lot about startups, I did want to talk about your startup and give it quite a bit of attention. So you have a startup, Junebrain, which is a telehealth eye scanning device that allows clinicians to monitor patients with eye and brain diseases outside of the clinic. So we talked a lot about your experience with startups, but I wanted to ask you, what was the actual process of starting the company like, since you are the founder and CEO?
Sure. So for Junebrain, I started the company legally because it was a requirement for a grant application. So when I started Junebrain, I was still very much in the academic world in terms of how I thought about things. So I just thought, oh, I have this great idea. I need to get grant funding so I can try it. And what I learned is that there's many different types of grants. One is SBIR grant, so it's for small businesses, and they require you to set up a company. You need to have an LLC or a corporation. So for me, the process was all focused around my grant application. So that included actually setting up the company, but also finding collaborators. So I pinged everyone I could think of that I had come to know at NIH or in grad school and asked them, hey, here's my idea. I know you're in this space. Would you be interested in talking more about it? Would you be like to be a part of it? And that's how I found my first collaborators. And they're still awesome advisors today for Junebrain. And the other most important part was customer discovery. So, I had this idea and it was based on my own experiences as a patient, but it was very important to make sure that it's not just my need, but that need is shared by other people. So I talked to as many patients, as many doctors that I possibly could, just to validate the idea.
And then the next question I wanted to ask is kind of building off of that, when you talked about how you were addressing a problem that you face and you were addressing a problem that other patients face. I was going to ask about like the research and development process of coming up with the prototype. How did you interact with people? How did you diagnose the problem and then come up with the most effective prototype?
Yeah. So it started with literally me just drawing concepts as best that I could, and I turned it into a provisional patent. And after that was filed, and that's super the easiest part for anyone to file a provisional patent, then I felt comfortable sharing the idea with other people. So I took that concept, and it was in the form of a grant. So it had schematics for the device, use cases, how would the device be used, who was going to use it, why would they use it, and I shared those with other people. So my advisors, other potential collaborators, university professors, and I just took in as much feedback as possible. And from there, I revised the designs, and that went into the grant application. Now that we're working on everything, the process is very much, you have the concept idea stage, then we developed the alpha prototype, which was the very first kind of proof of concept. It's what's in our office. It's not something we would ever sell, but it's just to show, hey, this technology can work. And now the next step, we're building the beta prototype. So that's something that people can actually put on, use, and we'll do clinical studies with that device.
That's really fascinating.
A lot of fun.
Yeah, it does sound like a lot of fun. When I was in middle school, I did this competition where we did build a prototype, but obviously it wasn't to that same level. So it's really interesting to hear, like, if you take this and you upscale it into like a professional setting, really like what you could do with a startup. So that's really, really amazing. When you talked about like the application, I mean the grant, the application for the grant, the alpha and beta prototypes, I was wondering, what are some obstacles that the company faced as you started it up, as you built those prototypes, as you got your collaborators?
Sure. For grants, they look at very specific things. So one of them is your team. So at the time, it was just me plus some advisors who were awesome, but it was a very small team. So that was one of the challenges, was convincing a panel of people that hey, not only are we super small team, but we have the ability to grow the team if you give us this money and actually implement this idea. So we were awarded the NSF award, but we were also rejected for a bunch of other grants. And a lot of the feedback they shared had to do with technical challenges. So they were unsure if things were possible. I think one reviewer of a grant said, "This is fun, but not possible to do." So I would love to show them what we have now, but it doesn't matter. That was his opinion. I think part of the process was really taking all of that feedback and putting it in a spreadsheet, and then really going through each one and saying, okay, this is very helpful. Yes, we should do this. Oh, we've already done this one. This isn't needed. But really taking time to look at all of that, what everyone said.
That's, yeah. And I also wanted to build off of that, like the challenges you may have faced as the CEO of this company, but I also wanted to build off of that and ask you a bit of a more personal question, which is, being a woman of color in leadership in a STEM-based field. I think it's a really popular question of especially my generation. So I wanted to ask, like, what has your journey been like in that position?
Yeah, interesting is the word. So there definitely have been challenges. So, for example, when I was in high school and it was time for everyone to share what colleges they wanted to go to with the guidance counselor, I walked in with my whole notebook full of colleges, the deadlines, and she just told me, no, I don't think you're college material. You should just focus on getting a job. And that was the end of the conversation. She wouldn't talk with me about it anymore. And it happened again in college. I went to a professor where I had a really good grade in her class, and I did well in her class, and she refused to write a recommendation for me for grad school. She said I wasn't PhD material, that I should focus on, again, getting a job. So I've had that, it happens all the time. Even now, talking to investors, I get comments sometimes, I've had an investor not believe that I went to the college I went to, for example, or not believing that the technology we're developing is real. I think a lot of those times, it's hard. It's always hard to hear that, especially when you're working so hard. But again, what I've learned is to separate myself from opinions like that and recognize that it's really them expressing their own worldview, which is not my world. It's different. And really, I see it as a flag that, that's not someone I should work with. So thank you for sharing so soon before we spend more time talking. So yeah, I think that will always be around. The nice thing, which I've loved, is as time has gone on, I've seen myself in more places. So like in high school, I didn't know any Black women biomedical engineers. Now I know a bunch. They're all over the place. And I think we'll just get better. So an interesting journey.
Yeah. When you said that your teachers and professors were saying you're not PhD material, you're not college material, that was really jarring for me, because it's almost like you said, their worldview, their prejudice, their discrimination is kind of standing in the way of them seeing a potential in a student.
Yeah.
And I have seen that happen to people. That's happened to me before, and it's just not right. And especially when the investor didn't believe you went to you have all those credentials. Yeah. That's another thing. And I think a great point was just that we shouldn't be wrapped up in other people's opinions. If they do have that perspective of you, they're just not the right people to work with. You want to be surrounded by people who believe in you, your product, your passion, etc. So thank you so much for that message. I think that's something that our students really need to hear. And so I wanted to transition to kind of my final question, and that's really open-ended to you. If you have any advice at all for high school students, please feel free to share.
Yes. So I made a list. So I would say one thing I always try to do, and it was terrible at first, but it's turned out to be a great thing, is try to do things that scare you. So it can be little things like I've always been super shy and kind of, an awkward in the corner person.
Yeah.
Not a very good way to describe it, but you know what I mean. So even in class in high school, I would dread when the teacher said, "Oh, who wants to share your thoughts about something?" And because I felt that dread, I would force myself to raise my hand. So people actually thought I was a teacher's pet, but that wasn't what I was doing at all. I was trying to get over the anxiety, and it works after a while. So that would be my number one thing, is do things that scare you or that make you nervous, and after a while it won't anymore. If you're interested in a certain field, talk to people who are in that field, so like informational interviews. If you want to go into science or do research in a neurology lab, find a neurologist on LinkedIn. And especially as students, I found that when you're a student asking for help, everyone wants to help. So just ping people on LinkedIn and say, "Hey, can I have 15 minutes of your time to chat about your career?" Take electives in high school just to learn about different things that you might be interested in or might not be. Learn that sooner than later. That's nice. Internships aren't just for college. I've had high schoolers work at Junebrain, and they were total brains, and it was great experience for them and for me and the company. So I would say those are the main things, but also have fun. Like high school, I can't. High school was difficult when I was in high school. Now it seems like there's even more pressure, and whatever way everyone can find time to just have fun and enjoy being in high school, try to. In college is fun.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all amazing advice. Thank you so much for putting together a list for students. They will definitely take that to heart, please. Yeah, so thank you so much. I think those are all the questions I have. I just wanted to say thank you so much for your time. Like I said before, you're a very inspirational innovator, especially a woman in a leadership position, a woman of color. Your representation of a lot of people, especially in our student audience at eCoreAcademy. So they will definitely benefit from all of the advice you've given. I just want to say thank you for helping people with your product. This product is definitely beneficial to a bunch of patients. And I think a lot of us right now, especially students like me, we're always thinking about the future, always thinking about what can we do to make the world a better place? How can we impact the world? And I think this is definitely giving us an idea of, okay, what is our place in society so that we can make society a better place for everyone. So thank you so much. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Thank you.
That's the conclusion of the interview. I hope Dr. Scott's message resonates with all young innovators around the globe. She used challenges she faced, such as her disability, to find creative ways to achieve her goals, such as the creation of Junebrain. My time with Dr. Scott was incredibly inspirational, and I hope the seed of innovation has been planted in all of you as well. Remember to stay tuned for more Meet the Champs videos like this one. If you enjoyed, hit the like, subscribe, and post notification buttons. Also comment and share. Have a great day.